Good evening. My name's Pete Woods, and you're watching Hexham TV. Hexham TV is an online community news and events channel based in Hexham and Northumberland. And Hexham TV is starting to put on more and more live events. And we're really pleased to have with us tonight a poet of renown from the Northeast. Introduce yourself, Harry.
Hiya, I'm Harry Gallagher. I'm based in the Northeast in the Colour Coats, and I do lots of poetry things. I run the Northeast stanza of the Poetry Society, but I get out and about and poet at people whenever possible. Several books available, and we're going to have a chat, aren't we?
Here we are. So let's see what some people have said about you, Harry, and about your poetry.
Careful now.
I'll start with your mum. No, here. There are gems herein, where it was gratifying to encounter those who hammered shape into the giants. That's a ghost river. And she was waltzing lovely on the surf, St. Mary of the Lighthouse. So two little quotes there. Harry's poems are full of a natural rhythm of his accent, the invention of his dry northern wit, and the conviction of his own truth, not afraid to stand its ground. Another one here. The spiritual and humanitarian successor to Adrian Mitchell, and that's from Neil Forward, poet and publisher. Harry Gallagher is a poet whose work will leave you breathless. Stunningly beautiful 1 second, brutal the next. He gets to the guts of what it means to be a modern human. And finally, a truly wonderful troubadour of the everyday. So some great reactions to your poetry there, Harry.
Yeah, I mean, it cost a fortune to get all those quotes out of them.
So I know you're a published poet in various forms, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But one of your publishers, Stairwell Books, has a little pen picture on their website that describes you and talks about you and your work. Harry Gallagher grew up amid the heavy industries of Middlesbrough and now lives in a small coastal village near Newcastle upon Tyne. He has written poetry all of his life, alongside working as a singer, songwriter, and playwright. Throughout the 1980s, he worked along with pretty much the last generation of men of his town who had spent their lives at the works, which belched out all sorts of unmentionable substances that they and their families breathed without question. Their work was often brutal, and Harry saw firsthand how the old cliche, hard work never harmed anyone, was a lie. These people and the lives they led continue to have a profound influence on his writing. The terrain of the North is now unrecognisable from 30 years ago. Harry digs deep into the nooks and crannies that have grown between then and now. He looks at a region and its people transformed, not always for the better. Much of the heavy industry is gone to be replaced by the 0 hours contract world of service, retail sector work, and leaving adrift a whole generation of people who were raised to work in jobs for life. Despite tackling subject matter which could be considered somewhat gloomy, Harry himself is an optimist. To quote a recent review, Harry Gallagher excels at finding harmony in unlikely places, in juxtapositions, extrapolating subtleties, that's the word, subtleties, extrapolating subtleties of nuance towards an expression of love. He is, in the end, a poet of hope.
Wow, fancy words there.
Yeah, some magic things said about you, Harry.
I'm flattered.
So let's hear one of your poems.
Yeah, I've brought along a sort of half a dozen by my side here, plucked from all over the place. This one I'm going to start with. It's I don't write that much in rhyme really, but this is a rhymer, and this is actually a true story. And I stopped doing it for a while because I kind of thought, well, people get sick of it. It's too simple as a poem. But I started again because people seem to love it. So just before we came on air, Pete, we were talking about where I sort of came from into performing and writing for a living, and I was telling you that I was at college in my mid-30s. Well, I passed out of college 21 years ago after doing the performing arts thing, and I got my first job, and I was thrilled. And at the time, I was broke. In fact, I was worse than broke. I had no money. I think I had £70 or something like that. And somebody, as a favour, bought me a train ticket to get to the digs to go and do my first tour. And I had £70 left in the bank, and I drew it all out because I wouldn't get paid immediately. I'd have to buy food for the first week or two, and be able to survive, be able to eat. And so anyway, got on the train with the train ticket, the one-way ticket, and it was going up to the west of Scotland countryside, which is where the digs were for the tour, and we were going to be rehearsing there for the first week. And we were on the train between, I think I got into Darlington, and was going up. The train was up to Glasgow, and then I was changing to minor trains to go to Ayrshire. So anyway, I'm sat next to this guy on the train, and he gets up sometime over the border into Scotland before Glasgow, certainly anyway. So he gets up, and I thought nothing of. I thought he was going to the toilet because we weren't stopping at any stops, And so anyway, he gets up and he didn't come back again, and I didn't think anything of it. But then when I came to go into Glasgow, I got up from my seat and I felt in my pocket, and the money had disappeared. And he pickpocketed me. I mean, it's more fooled me. I felt so stupid. He pickpocketed me and disappeared somewhere else on the train. And by the time we got to Glasgow, and I realised there'd been, a couple of other stops, he'd be gone. So there I was, absolutely, utterly, truly penniless. I didn't have a credit card, nothing like that. And I thought, oh, what am I going to do? So I felt so foolish, leaving my money in my pocket to be taken like that. So I got up at Glasgow and I reported it as a crime, but I said, I'll never hear from you again. You're supposed to report these things. And I got on, by this point, I was thinking, oh, what am I going to do? And I got on the little local train to take me to Ayr. And it was just late on a Sunday night, it was autumn. And we went through all these little stations. It was rumbling through them really slowly, and it was freezing cold, misty. You can picture the scene. And there was an oldish lady who was the conductor. And as the train began thinning out, and I was getting towards my stop, about 2 stops from the end, she came to me and said, "Oh, what's wrong with you? You're not very happy." And so I kind of spilled it, and I said, "Oh, so stupid, got pickpocketed, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do for the week to buy lunches and things and to feed myself." And she was, "Oh no, that's really sad." And she went away, and I thought nothing of it. And she came back 2 minutes later with a bundle of notes in her hand to give me money out of her pocket. And I suddenly felt like a con man. I suddenly thought, oh, this looks like I've spun her a line. Mm. And I began backtracking and saying, "Oh, no, that's not the reason. I only told you because you asked." And she, bless her, it's the kindest thing anyone's ever done to me. And she said, "I'm retiring tomorrow, and I get my money then. This is yours." And I was still resisting, and she took my hand and put the £50 in it. It was £50 from her own money. Put £50 in my hand and closed my fingers around it. And at that, she went and opened the train doors for the last but one stop, and she actually got off the train and turned around and waved bye to me from the platform and smiled. And it stayed with me, such an act of kindness out of nothing, and saved my skin. And so anyway, that's a very long story for quite a short poem, but I'm going to really start with this because it's such a kind thing. So it sort of stays with you, and you think you've got to pass it on, really, haven't you? It's our duty as people to help each other out. If we can't do that, we're lost. So the title of this becomes apparent in the very last line of the poem. I once met a lady saint aboard the Glasgow to Ayr train. On a demonic autumn night, my darkling darling shone a light. Swishing her sparkly ScotRail dress, she spotted a boy in distress. Pirouetted to my side, and upon her landing glide, she rested down right next to me, put a hand upon my knee, looked me in the eyes and knew, now then, what can we do for you? And the pocket a bad man had emptied, she filled up with generosity. And as we pulled into air, she shook her whitened hair, and fairy dust sprinkled its way through my skin, where it lives to this day. It wakes me up and fills my sails, blessed by St. Agnes of the Rails.
Very good. There's some good people out there, Harry.
St. Agnes of the Rails. I never knew her name. I wish I did. I wish I could find her.
Yeah.
But yeah, I never saw her again. But I thought she was a saint that night. Bless her soul.
There's some good people out there.
There is, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it's easy to forget. In these days of, I get sucked into social media just as badly as anybody else does, and you can sometimes see the worst of human behaviour, where people are mean-spirited to each other, quick to accuse, slow to forgive. But actually, sometimes when you meet real people like that, they're just absolute gems. These people.
Yeah.
She was lovely. Saint Agnes. That's who she became.
What started in the first place, Harry?
What started me writing? I've always written. I had a lovely upbringing, and I say I was working class. Maybe we were a bit posher than working class. I don't know, but it never felt so. Mum and Dad. My dad was a fitter, and I was always arty, but I didn't know that was a word for it. When I was a kid, going into the arts for a living or writing for a living it was never ever on the horizon. It wasn't possible. Everybody in Middlesbrough where I lived. In fact, I remember a careers teacher when I was about 14 or 15 coming around the school, and he said, "Well, where does your dad work?" And I told him he works for a crane hire company as a fitter. And he said, "Well, if he'd worked at the dockyard, you could have got a job there because your dad can get you in there." And so aside from that, well, there's ICI and there's British Steel. So pick one of those and go and get an apprenticeship. And that was my 2-minute careers advice talk, Yeah. So I spent years doing a series of ever unhappier jobs, square peg in a round hole, until I got the chance to change at the age of 34, I think I was. By then I'd been in bands, I'd done amateur dramatics on a night, and I'd always written. It was a guilty secret. So why I write, I don't know. I just do, always have done, but I never fessed up until years later. And I don't always write. I didn't start off writing publishable poems, but you just learn as you get on, don't you?
Yeah. Who told you were good?
Who told us I was good?
Yeah. Encouragement, don't you, as a performer? You need, when you eventually sort of take some, piece of paper out of your pocket and you stand up in front of people and you actually express something that's very close to you and how you're feeling at a certain point in your life. You do need encouragement. It might not come that night, but someone will say, actually, you got something there. Who told you were good?
Funnily enough, there's two. It comes from two things. One, my dad. Funnily enough, I wished he kind of lived long enough for me to see me out and about performing, doing this. But he died some years ago. He spotted it in me when I didn't think I had anything. He always told me you should be a writer. Years and years ago, even when I was making my living as an actor and doing music stuff, he always used to say, "Well, that's all very well, son, but you need to pursue the writing. That's where you're at." And I used to kind of dismiss it, going, "Oh yeah," But actually, so he always encouraged it, and I did it whether he encouraged me or not. To be honest with you, I always wrote secretly. But then, About 10 years ago, I screwed my courage to the stage and went to an open mic night, funnily enough in Middlesbrough, even though I wasn't living there anymore. And I met a publisher just that first night. I met the guy who was running the night, also had his own small press, which he still does. And I went on and did a couple of poems in the open mic, and he sort of snapped me up. And even though we don't give each other compliments very easily in Middlesbrough, he was he very, very gently encouraging. And I gradually, over the next year or two, started doing it more. And wherever I went, I couldn't believe it at first, but people would laugh in the right places and they'd cry in the right places. And people would pull me up afterwards and go, "Oh my God, have you been watching me?" All this stuff that I wrote and wrote for years. Suddenly, people seem to relate to it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I worry that I write stuff that's too personal, it's just me. But apparently all this stuff's universal, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
And so people like it's. I think it's my job as a poet when I'm out and about reading. My job is really to connect with people. So you use the best language that you can, and be as personable as you can, and as interesting as you can, and make the connection. That's my job, really.
So tell us about this next poem, Harry.
Yeah. This next poem, I wasn't going to do this because this is brand new. Well, it's I think it's about 2 weeks old, this one, and you spotted this and said, "Oh, you should do this one." So I'm going to do this, even though it hasn't been published yet. I try not to be too political, even though I'm a political animal. You know, people can get driven away by ranting about politics, so I try not to do it. But if you're not political, you can just switch off for a minute and go and have a cup of tea and come back. I'm going to do this one, which is political, because frankly, a 1% pay offer for the people who've kept us going over the past 12 months and who we've all leaned and relied upon is an insult. So here we are. This is called 1% and a round of applause. For all the zipped up body bags, for carrying your country without pause, for tending all those beds, for tending to our dead. You get 1% and a round of applause. For willing breath into spent lungs, snatching life from death's sure jaws, for working without sleep, digging in, digging deep. You get 1% and a round of applause. For walking through a hurricane, the thanks from they who make the laws, a quick roll from a drum kit, you can like it or lump it. It's 1% and a round of applause. There we are.
Yeah, very powerful.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, you know, and I think it's our duty as citizens to hold our own government to account, and things like that aren't good enough, are they, really?
No, certainly not in my book. They're not.
No, not in mine either. But don't worry, I have lots of conservative friends. You're welcome to come back now.
So how's it been for you during the past year, Harry? I mean, I'm sure your gigs have stopped and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, what part of the joy has been, you know, before then was getting up and down the country, and I've done live sets everywhere from Skye to London and everywhere in between, the West Coast, the East Coast, everywhere, and every region you can name, really. So I have missed that in the past 12 months. It's been a bit of a sad miss. Plus, I've got a book waiting to come out, which is pointless releasing it when you can't get out and go and connect with people. But, you know, here we are by the power of technology. So I've done a few of these kind of things. I've had a few live from my living room to yours events where I've read from books and things. So, you know, you just got to keep going. And hey, I'm not going to complain. I'm one of the lucky ones. You know, that I have a very lucky life here. I live in a lovely bit of the country, as do you, where you are. And if you're not starving, then you're okay, you know, and I'm not starving. So I can't complain, but it'll be nice when we can finally get back together. And you know what I miss? I miss hugging people. I hug blokes as well as women. I hug anybody. And actually, that really human thing is what I think we all miss if we are being honest about it.
Yeah. How do you write?
How do I write? Is that the question? It just broke up at the end there.
Yeah. That's how do you write? So do you carry around a pocketbook and get inspired by things you see, or are you getting up early in the morning, or
all of that and more. So sometimes I'll be sat in the garden. No, not in the garden at the moment. You can't go in the garden; it's too cold. But sometimes I'll be sat in the kitchen having a cup of coffee first thing in the morning at sort of 6:30, 7, and the sun's just come up, and you hear a bit of bird song. And I suppose this does relate back to why I write, because I've always been a daydreamer. And what was for many years a fault has suddenly become a strength. and I did that, when I was a little kid. My sisters are still around, and they would tell you if you asked. I would get told off for sitting there with one sock on, having spent 20 minutes in cloud cuckoo land trying to get they're trying to get me ready for school in the morning. I would just drift off. Well, I kind of you learn to live as a grown up, but I can still do that. I can easily just drift away. So sometimes a poem, this is going to sound pretentious, but sometimes a poem will just fall out of the shower head. I'll just hear it, I hear words, and I'm aware with it. And then suddenly, I'm getting dried, but actually I'm on autopilot because I'm thinking of ordering the words that are flying around my head. So sometimes it's like that. It just happens out of the ether. And other times I'll feel really moved, or I've read something or seen something. And if I go 2 or 3 days without writing something, I get really itchy and I have to splurge something out. And actually, when that happens, it's not always the best writing. The best stuff just comes from dreamland somewhere. So how do I write? I'm probably the worst person to ask. I just do it.
Okay. Tell us about your next.
My next poem. Oh yeah. So I'm going to tell you another story now, and this is a true story. And I didn't know this. I've lived on Tyneside now for some years, getting on for 20 years. And I didn't know until about 5 years ago of this story. That in the First World War in 1915, matter of fact, it was this time of year, it was the 14th of April, 1915, a German Zeppelin, as part of the First World War effort, a German Zeppelin came in over St. Mary's Lighthouse in Whitley Bay, in full view of everybody, and started dropping bombs. And there weren't proper bombs. I mean, there wasn't a bomb there for a start. So what you had in the Zeppelin was people leaning out of the windows and hoying out these devices. And what they were basically almost like bottles. They were sort of the shape of bombs, about, I don't know, this big. You can't see that, can you? About 1.5 feet long, maybe 2 foot long, and quite sort of this thick. You can see my hands there about how thick it is. And they were made of sort of, I think it was a kind of a heavy glass. And they would have a fuse in them, they'd light it and throw it out the window. It was full of petrol. So mostly this Zeppelin ghosted around in Northumberland. It went to sort of Bedlington and Cramlington and all of this farmland. And it mostly they just dropped in fields and did no damage. They would just burn themselves out among the grass. But what they were actually after, as is always the case in these kind of things, they were after the industry. And what they were after was at Wallsend, which is where the shipyards were. And it eventually made its way up to Wallsend. It was on a Sunday. And there was a woman bathing her children, a tin bath in front of the fire. I think her husband was out. And she heard a thud. And then suddenly hot oil started dripping through the roof around her and the kids. And a mighty woman in those days, it started igniting. So she got the kids out on the street and went back in and beat the flames out herself. How rock is that? Brilliant woman. So she was called Sarah Robinson. I found out her name. And while she was doing this, the kids outside, she's beating the flames out. Word got out that her house had been hit. And the men folk, some of them had been given makeshift rifles as part of the war effort. And so they went and got the rifles and they started shooting at the Zeppelin in the sky with these really basic makeshift rifles. It was no use. I mean, the Zeppelin was far too high for them to hit it, but it sort of did the trick in that it went off over the North Sea and it never came back again. And so I thought, when I found out this story, and actually, if you go in the Seconduna Museum when it always opens up again at Wall's End, you'll see the bomb casement. It's there behind glass. So I thought it would be really fun to give a voice to one of those guys who's shooting up at it. So this is from my book, Northern Lights. Copy still available. And this is called The Zeppelin's Biggest Mistake. How are you with the time with your bombs, Bonnie lad? Bring that fat old balloon overhead. This is the town that Hadrian built. We'll pull down his wall and we'll take you down and all. Only I wouldn't linger long if I were you, because me and me mates are primed with our rifles. You see, you went too far last night when you slipped your filthy bombs on Mrs. Robinson's house. A little lassie in the bath, oil bubbling through rafters. The fire's out now, you might not like to hear. Ben's safely out on cobbles. She strode back into flame and flannelled away the last traces of you. See, this is what happens when the devil hangs around in Cloud, our God's country. Angels like her tell devils like me, casting upwards to heaven with hell in me fingers. But don't stay away too long, Bonnie lad. Steer that big black bumblebee hour here where we can see it. We are men who magic up ships, our fists pull coal from the earth, and have spit bigger than you. I'm going back to the Misses and Bairns now, son, and you're going back to yours. But don't stay away and don't be a stranger. We'll keep the home fires burning, and I've got one here for you. There we are. I can just imagine the little Geordie fellas shooting at the thing, you know. A bit of a Dad's Army affair.
Does change anything, Harry?
Does what, sorry?
Does poetry ever change anything?
Oh, now weirdly enough, I would being from Middlesbrough, one of the things we carry around with us like a sack of coal is pessimism. It runs right through us, and I would often be minded to say no, of course it doesn't. It can make you feel better or make you feel in touch. But actually, I had a lovely occurrence a couple of weeks ago. It started off as a horrible thing. There was a guy, I won't go into the details, but in my home football club, Middlesbrough, they have this super fan in London, and he's just loves the club. And I think he's Yusuf is, I think he's Middle Eastern origin originally, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But he really loves the team for whatever strange reason. He's got no ties with the area, but he adopted us some years ago, spends thousands and thousands of pounds every year following this team, and is the most lovely, enthusiastic, inclusive person, encouraging person you could ever wish to meet. And everybody who goes to the matches knows him. And the club said to him about a month ago, Yusuf, we'd love you. You know all the players backwards. You know everything about them. We've got this opportunity for you could be the fans' voice and interview. You get to interview any of the players you want to. We'll do one a month, and you be the interviewer, and we'll put it out, and it goes out nationwide. This big interview. So he was just made, like, and everybody thought that was great, apart from one awful website, which was a so-called fans forum. It wasn't the main one. This kind of, you might use the word renegade or sideline fans forum, which had a few racists on it, and they started kicking off. And they started with all this snide stuff about, they're only giving him this because he's he's from where he's from, and it's box ticking and all of this awful stuff. And then it got worse into full-on abuse, where as they all joined in. And somebody showed Yusuf this, and he was just crestfallen. He was heartbroken. And he actually said, I'm not going to do it. I have to look after my own mental health. So that's the awful bit of the story. I don't have any illusions. I'm not particularly high profile. I'm not famous or anything, but I kind of just thought that's just an awful thing to happen. And I wrote a poem about it expressing, if that's who we are, then we should be ashamed of ourselves. Yeah. And I just put it on Facebook and then kind of forgot about it. Overnight, it got shared all over the place. It kind of went viral. And here's the bit that I'm getting around to answering your question: does poetry change anything? Yusuf saw it and was really heartened, and he came on and had a conversation with me. And then the local radio station saw it, and they had him on and interviewed him the next day about it. And they were getting all of these, like, thousands of people calling in saying, no, you can't let this stop you, and do the job. And then the police got interested, and the club backed him up. And the person who'd started all of this awful abuse off scarpered, like the coward they are, and scurried away, leaving this really groveling apology behind afterwards. And so, to get back to answering your question, which I've took ages of time to do it, now and again it can, just little specific things like that. Just a little poem that I wrote in quarter of an hour seemed to take off, and the guy who was about saw it and was encouraged, and then the media picked up on it, and guess what? The club have talked him into doing it, and he's done the first 2 interviews already. And yeah, so it's now and again, if you're lucky, you get to change something.
That's a great story, Harry. Well done.
Well, I got lucky.
What's the next poem about?
The next poem, funnily enough, is about Middlesbrough, about my old hometown, and it's about my heritage, which I was born and brought up in Teesside, but my ancestors, along with half of Teesside, came from Ireland. Middlesbrough, 200 years ago, barely existed. It had a long history before that, going to the Middle Ages, but by the early 1800s, there was, I think it was 17 people lived in Middlesbrough. It was a farm and outlying buildings, and that was it. There was nothing there, absolutely nothing there anymore. So then they found iron in the hills, and the Industrial Revolution was going on, and so they needed, there was all these ironworks, so they opened steel foundries and along the banks of the seas everywhere, and it became like the Wild West. It was like the gold rush. So all the Irish came in because there was a famine on an island, and it was a natural place to come. So swathes of Irish people came over, including my ancestors, and filled up Teesside and built it. The Irish came and they built the roads, and they laid down the railways and all the rest of it, and stayed. And hence my name, Gallagher. So this is about all of that. I'm going to try and do it from memory, but God's law, I'll probably forget it. But here it goes. This is moulded from Ferris. This town was moulded from Ferris, on the backs of the Irish and the miners shipped in from the Southland to these badlands. From the stench of the chimneys to the quench of the bars, lining the streets of a town made of iron. On the bodies of every Patrick and Michael and Rose and Colleen, and the skinned knees and elbows of thousands of children, playing and dancing on cobbles and grime, they're building a future in 3/4 time. And down in the King Billy, they're drowning the cares, draining the dregs from the last of the kegs. But while daddies are drinking, mummies are cleaning. While all in the one bed, 4 babies are dreaming of one day maybe's living on the posh side of the rails. But their horizons were made up from choking smoke trails. This town was moulded from Ferris, and the blood of the Irish, and the pride of its people, and the sinews and sweat of the men underground, and the ashes of all who expired in a furnace. All those Patricks and Michaels, Roses and Colleens, they all burnt their boats on the river of dreams.
Very good.
Thank you.
What poets inspire you? Who do you read?
As wide as I can, really. Originally, the ones that I loved, I still love. They're still there. Dylan Thomas looms large in my reading. I like quite a lot of Auden. Yeats was a great poet. So quite old and traditional ones. But then, he's not fashionable anymore to like him anymore. But I love Roger McGough still. And just in case you think it's just male poets, Caroline Duffy's a genius, and even people like Wendy Cope who are very mainstream. But there are poets everywhere, and I like bits and bobs. I'm a bit of a magpie. in terms of the reading, and I just like to read new stuff. So the bookshelves are creaking under the weight of ever increasing poetry books I refuse to give away. So that's where I came from, but it probably still is the voice that I'm closest to. But I I have lots. I'm friends now with quite a lot of poets, and you read theirs, and you take from what you want. And there's some marvelous poets about at the moment.
Yeah, and it's become a lot more mainstream, in terms of being out there and visible, hasn't it? Before COVID, the poetry slams and poetry clubs and poetry nights and things like that just became a lot more acceptable and open to people.
Absolutely, I used to run one. I founded one with a poet friend in the northeast. They're called the Stanza, and she still runs it now. Well, she had until last year. I'm sure it'll start up again. And that's performance poetry. But then there's things that they're just called page poetry, where it's not performancey, where the words count and people just read them to you. I just think you can do both, really. But yeah, it has. There's lots of performance nights about, and the more the merrier. The more you can connect with people, but connect people together, so that they go, I'm not such a freak out on my own. We're all a bit similar. Then the better it is. Everybody talks about about well-being these days and mental health. Well, then the more you can do to make all that a bit easier for folk, the better, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think you've got two for us, Harry. I'm right. Counting right?
Yeah.
So what's the next one?
The next one I've got is this is the title poem from my forthcoming book with the artist Johnny Hanna, who's become a friend. I was introduced to Johnny because he did a big project last year in Woodhorn Colliery. He's based in the south, but he's a Scottish fella actually. But anyway, he put a call out, and I connected with him, and we've got a book coming out as soon as we can all get out on the road. It'll be published, called True North: A Kiss for Your Soul. So I thought I wrote this for Johnny really, and I thought I'd read this today, and if you go to my website sometime in the coming months, it'll be there to buy. True North. This wind, even southerly, is a stern grandfather. Sea bent and weathered, he yields to no man, for this is true North, where herring gulls stand sentry over castles and bones, and foam whose face has shaved the land since time. Top of the compass, heart of the nation, this is the point you meet your match. It's in the passing crack of fishermen whose nets hang knotted and blessed with food for the hungry, the timely, the lucky. Over bell pits and salt pans, we clasp our hands to fire up the blood that powered the country, that dug up the coal, that shaped the ships, that forged the rails, that invented the engines, that made the trains, that riveted bridges from our ironclad hills. The same hands now open to hold yours in them, solid and warm, real and firm. True North.
Great.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I am. No matter where I go, and I do travel widely, there's nowhere like this. There's nowhere like the Northeast where there's such stunning scenery and history. I've got into history as I'm getting old. I'm getting really interested in what went before, and that comes out through the poetry. Wherever you go, the land is scarred with fishing industry or shipbuilding, and it's all still there to look at. Amazing, an amazing part of the world, this.
Mm. And what sort of reaction do you get when you go further afield, Harry? Up into Scotland or down to the south? What sort of reaction do you get?
It's people seem to still love it. I sell books everywhere. I'm lucky, but yeah, I always thought maybe I'm just going to be regional, and that's fine. And so people around North Shields and environs might get it and enjoy it, or from Teesside. But actually, wherever I go in Scotland, all over all of the UK, Wales, an island. I gigged at a festival in Ireland 2 or 3 years ago. People just seem to get it. So I don't like to analyze too much, but that'll do me.
I'm just going to show you a comment that's come up in the chat box, Harry.
Oh,
I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, right. David Atkinson, that's lovely. Yeah, well, I'm with you, David. That's fantastic. The second one yesterday, brilliant, brilliant. Everybody should write. Anyone can write, really. It's not magic. You can learn how to write, and then you just put your own voice to it. But yeah, it's the same with drama. My other thing that I do is schools, since time immemorial, have complicated the teaching of drama and the teaching of literature and the teaching of poetry, so that everybody thinks, oh, I could never belong to that club. You know, you have to be an expert. You have to understand the meter. You have to understand what a villanelle is. You have to understand how a sonnet works. You have to use exactly 10 syllables. Like rubbish, all rubbish. Poetry, decent poetry, should be relatable to ordinary people. You know, and if you do it right, it is. So that's brilliant, David. I'm so glad you start writing poetry. Keep going. I'll see you on a stage somewhere. Oh, Michael, I know Michael, you see. Michael's a fantastic Irishman.
So, Harry, you've talked about having some books published and one that's going to come out in the future. Where can people find out more information about your work? Where can they buy your books? Where can they perhaps see you perform in the future?
A very good question. I have a website, and it's quite a long title, but Harry Gallagher Poet. That's harrygallagherpoet.wordpress.com. Go there. There's lots of horrible pictures of me performing on stages, and there's a bookshop where you can buy an array of books. I'm a bit shameless. I get out all over the place, and so these are all published and for sale to lesser or greater extent. So they're all on my website. And normally, when I'm out and about touring, the forthcoming gigs are listed there. Obviously, it's not at the moment, but we'll get back to it.
Yeah,
harrygallagherpoet.wordpress.com.
That's great, Harry. Well, Harry, it's been having you on Hexham TV this evening, and you're getting a good reaction from the audience as well, which is fab. And hopefully, at some point, not too long away, we'll be able to come out and see you in person at a festival or a pub somewhere or a back room or something like that, and see you.
Yeah,
which would be great.
That would be fantastic. I love Hexham, so yeah. It'd be nice to get over to Hexham and do something again.
Yeah, we've got a great book festival here, and I'm sure they'd be interested in the sort of stuff you do.
I would love to come. Me and Johnny, with the aforementioned True North, need somewhere to launch it locally when we get a date. So it'd be great to launch it at Hexham.
Yeah, great. Well, hopefully they'll watch this and take you up on that offer. So you've got one more poem for us, Harry, I think, before you leave.
I have.
Tell us a little bit about this poem.
This was written in fury. I have two grown-up daughters, and I'm immensely proud of both of them. And they both ended up working in the care sector for the NHS, and so they're among the legions of frontline people who've rescued us in the last year. They've looked after the people who can't look after themselves, and they do such a fantastic job, and they work so hard. And as always, you know, the hardest working job, you know, hard work pays. No, it doesn't. The hardest working jobs are the worst rewarded. So at some point, was it last year? But it's all fit into a mush time-wise. But the Home Secretary came out and said, well, they're not going to get a pay rise because they're unskilled. She referred to the whole care sector as unskilled, and therefore they're not worth a pay rise. While the banks and the cities are creaming it off. And I just thought, that's just stinks. So I won't get into any more ranting about that particular thing, but it moved me to write this. And every time I write this, I'm defending my daughters. So here we are. Thanks for having us on. This is Unskilled. She is not unskilled. She is full of humanity. She deals with it daily, the blood and spit of life in all its dark glory. She's particularly good at holding the hand of your mum, who doesn't know you anymore, who cries in the night for a hug from her daddy, long cold in the ground. She has a degree in there, performed in sing-song at 4 in the morning while changing wet sheets, making it better. A cloak of invisibility, an unwanted superpower, renders her open to attack from glad-handing climbers on their way upwards to nowhere special, greasing the pole behind them. She has diplomas in kindness, patience, and back-breaking work. To the background noise of the sneers and smears of some jerk who wouldn't have the wherewithal to do her job. She is skilled as a magician. Her body is the foundry of a nation suddenly grateful. Her heart its steel press. If she falls, we all fall. She's powered by thanks and a job well done. The pacified pulse of a country gone haywire. She is he, his husband, midwife, cleaner, nurse, caregiver, osteopath, and she stands as mighty as a forest as she carries us all on her back.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Very passionate.
Well, you know, it's life isn't unfair, and life isn't fair sometimes. And I don't know why they carry on doing the job they do sometimes, except they're really good people. And just like the people who are currently inoculating us all in gyms and sports halls and village halls across the country, we deserve to thank them, you know, in monetary terms as well as verbally and in rounds of applause. They deserve more.
Well, thank your daughters on our behalf, Harry, for all they do for people.
I will do.
And all care workers and nurses and doctors and associated people who've been looking after us over the last year and before and will do afterwards.
Absolutely.
Harry, it's been a pleasure to have you on Hexham TV.
It's been lovely talking to you.
Thanks very much for sharing with us your poems, but also your feel for the Northeast and your passion about what's important and why we should take poetry seriously and why people should write, because as you said, anybody could write, and it might be the way you write, but it'll be the way they write, and that's good enough.
Absolutely is.
So if you've enjoyed watching Hexham TV and meeting Harry tonight, please share this post. The recording will be on Hexham TV Facebook page if you think you know of anybody who might be interested to watch the recording. And please do search out Harry Gallagher Poet if you want to see more of Harry's work and to buy one of his books. Thank you very much. So everyone watching live and the recording, follow Hexham TV on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And thank you very much for watching. Good night.
Good night.